Hello everyone, this is Callie. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm excited to share today's project. It's a special framed art in a shadow box using some simple flower dies that we're going to turn into 3D art. And then I've got some paper weaving that you can see in the background of this frame as well. So to start, we're going to start with the weaving, and it is a long process. So I'm going to try to explain it in the best way I can. This is some fog cardstock from Simon Says Stamp. And on the 8.5-inch side, I'm going to cut 1/4-inch strips. I've cut this full sheet of cardstock down so that it fits in my trimmer and I can easily see the 1/4-inch grid marks on the trimmer so that I can keep sliding as I make each cut. For these 8.5 by 1/4-inch strips, I'm going to need a total of 28 of them. I also need some longer strips for the diagonal weaving on my background. So I'm using another piece of fog cardstock and cutting along the 11-inch side so that I can get some 11-inch by 1/4-inch strips, and I'll need 8 of those. For an 8 by 8 shadow box, this is the exact amount that I'll need for my project. Again, that's 28 shorter strips and 8 longer strips if you want to replicate this project. Now, using some washi tape, I'm going to face the sticky side up and then use some additional washi tapes at the ends so that I can create a loom for those paper strips to start weaving my project. And I'm using the grid marks on my glass board here so that I can frame an 8 by 8-inch loom, if that makes sense. Again, all the sticky sides are facing up except for the smaller strips that are holding down the cardstock on the side. And I did all this with a test loom for the first time right before I started filming, so here's my test loom. I thought that the craft cardstock was a little bit too dark for me, so I decided to switch to a lighter cardstock, so I chose fog. So because I did my test loom, I know that I need to start at the 3/4-inch mark. And then I'm going to space out each of these horizontal strips 1.25 inches. Because there's going to be a second strip later on, so I want my spacing to be 1 inch apart for each of these squares. So we'll get to that, but this is why I came up with these calculations. After I've done all of my horizontal strips, I went ahead and did my vertical strips, and I started from left to right with the exact same measurements. For my third layer of strips, I'm going to lay another horizontal layer just underneath the first set of horizontal layers. Now you'll see I left an intentional gap there because you'll see as we start weaving, there's going to be a lot of pressure with these strips sitting next to each other, and you want to add that spacing to make sure that it's not too tight. Then I've created my loom, and I'll go ahead and close it all off with another layer of washi tape over the sticky, so that way there's no more sticky exposed. I hope that makes sense, but basically we've created a loom and now we can start weaving. Once my loom is free, I'm going to go ahead and remove the tacky ends from the washi tape so that I can have a better grasp of the loom as I weave these paper strips through. For all of these vertical strips, I'm going under the first horizontal bar and over the second horizontal bar. Once each strip is weaved all the way through, I'm going to push it as close as I can to the strip right next to it. Then I'll repeat all of these vertical bars all the way across until I get to the end. Again, that's under the first horizontal bar and then over the second horizontal bar, repeating all the way down and pulling that paper through, and then sandwiching it next to the vertical strip next to it so that there's very little gap. I'm going to finish this last vertical strip here and then make any adjustments I need to pull those strips really close together. Like I said, there's going to be a little gap, but you want them to be as close together as possible, because that's going to matter in this next step where I go diagonally from top left to bottom right. And as I weave, I'm going to go over the horizontal bars. We're going over 2 at a time now, going over the horizontal bars, under the vertical bars, back over the horizontal bars, and then under the vertical bars again. So it's going to be a really tight fit, and that's why you want that spacing as close together as possible, because you're going to be pulling these strips through at a diagonal, and it's going to make and hold this weave together. So as you can see here, it's very snug, especially with this first one, And as I add more diagonal strips, those spaces get pulled tighter and tighter together and are more consistent, and it's easier for me to weave in each additional piece. So I'm going to carefully pull and tug and use just a little bit of overlap at a time so that I don't have to bend my paper to get it to go over or under the paper. Again, I'm going over the horizontal bars and under the vertical ones. And I should also note that I am using the longer of the two sizes of strips for these diagonal portions. So I'll use 4 for the middle diagonal sections on this direction, and then when I go the other direction, I'll use the other long strips. Okay, so again, I'm going to repeat the process. I'm going under the vertical bars, over the horizontal bars, and then under and over again until I get all the way through. And I'm going to repeat this for every diagonal strip for this particular direction. As I get closer to the corners, the strips are going to get shorter and shorter. So I'm going to cut off any excess. And for this very last corner, don't forget you don't want to skip this corner. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process even though there's very little to see here. It's important to get this last bar in there to make sure that the pattern is consistent. Now there's not much holding that strip there, so I will be using some washi tape to tape down those last pieces at the corners. So that completes my diagonals going in one direction. To complete this rattan pattern, I'm going to go the other direction now, and it's going to be the opposite of what it was before. So instead of going over the horizontal bars, this time I'm going under, and then over the vertical bars, under the horizontal bars, and then over again. So I'll repeat that process going all the way through. I know it's quite repetitive, but it's important to get that weave just right to accomplish this pattern and to make sure that the weave in the end is so strong that it can stand alone and won't fall apart. As I started weaving in this second set of diagonals, I realized that I needed to cut little slits along the washi tape so that I can get my strips to sit better at the ends. So I did that all the way around, and now I'm going to continue my weaving for this direction for the diagonals. Again, that's under the horizontal bars, over the vertical, under the horizontal, over the vertical. So I'll repeat this process until I finish every row of this diagonal pattern. And I noticed, and maybe you can too from watching, but sliding these strips through gets easier and easier because all of the pieces that are working together right now to hold this pattern together are pushing all of those other strips closer and closer together. So it's more consistent in the weave and it makes it all spaced out evenly. I hope that makes sense. So here we are finished with our weaving, and there's this beautiful rattan woven cane weave. And I've got my background for the frame. I just want to adhere it to a piece of 8x8 cardstock now, so I'm going to use some liquid adhesive and cover the back with liquid adhesive. I'm being careful to add adhesive in little amounts everywhere so that it adheres properly. And then I'm going to place the white paper inside our washi tape frame. So you see, it was very important for me to use the lines on my glass board so that I can make that perfect square 8x8 inches. Now I'm going to flip it over and adhere all the loose ends on this rattan weave, and then I'll set it aside and let it dry while I work on my die cut flowers and foliage. I'm using the Aurora Blooms die set from Simon Says Stamp. There are lots of different blooms and foliage, but in order to turn these into 3D flowers, I am selectively choosing the blooms that are cut more towards the center. So the slits there are very obvious, the petals are standalone almost, so you don't want something that's more circular, if that makes sense. So on these bigger blooms, they're going to be open flowers. And I want the insides of the flowers to be lighter than the outside of the flowers. So on the front here, I'm just swiping ink towards the center and just darkening the outer edges. And then on the back side of these pieces, I'm ink blending them heavy-handed so that there's more pink and darker color. Now these smaller blooms are going to be closed buds. So I'm just ink blending one side because you're not going to see the inside of the flowers anyway. And on those, I'm going to fade them a little bit from dark to light, going from the outer edges to the center. And I'll do that with the medium-sized flowers as well. When I'm done ink blending these flowers, I'll also ink blend the foliage. I die cut 3 different stems of foliage in 3 different colors of green. That way I have lots of different color variation and texture. But I'm also ink blending as well to create additional shading. Now I'm going to ink blend all of the foliage with kale and artichoke ink. With the darker stem, I am just adding the kale to add a little bit more darkness to that already dark cardstock. And then I don't ink blend that third darker green cardstock at all. Now moving on to shaping these die cuts, I'm using the Tim Holtz Sizzix shaping kit. There's a nice and sturdy piece of foam in there that's going to help you apply pressure onto the paper using these styluses that have different sized ball heads at the very ends of them so that you can manipulate different sizes of cardstock and different shapes of cardstock as well. There's also a tweezer in the kit, but I'm not going to be using that, so I'll set that aside. Alternatively, Spellbinders has another shaping kit from the Susan Tierney collection. This is the Susan's Garden Ultimate Toolkit, and it comes with the all-in-one tool, and you can switch out the heads for different tools that also include tools that will help you to shape cardstock. There's a little foam piece in there as well, comes with tweezers and scissors. So you have options, and I'll link them all below for you. If you're interested in anything that I used in today's video or shared, be sure to check out the links below, as well as on the coordinating blog where everything will be listed for your convenience. All right, so I have shaped my first large flower there, and as you can see, I'm pulling in another tool. This is a well-loved tool of mine. I don't think a lot of people know about it, but it's a Sizzix fold and form making tool. So it looks like a bone folder, but at the end, it's got a little slit in it. It can help you manipulate paper, curl ribbon, all sorts of different fun things, but it's such a handy tool to have for forming flowers like this. I wanted to curl the larger ends of the petals back so that it can reveal more of the petal. Okay, so for these smaller blooms, the petals are a little bit tighter, and in order for me to increase my ability to manipulate the paper so that I can create buds, I'm going to cut some extra slits between the petals going towards the center of the flower, but not cutting all the way through. That way it still stays attached. And I'll do the same thing using my stylus tool here, and I'm just pressing down and rolling in a circular motion so that I can break the paper fibers and make them a little bit more moldable. So as you can see here, I am able to fold this paper up, make it curl, and manipulate it into looking like a bud. So I'll do that with all 3 of those medium-sized flowers, and I'll also curl these yellow pieces as well because they're going to act as stamens on the inside of the flowers. So I'll do that with all of these little pieces, and I'll also work on the smaller blooms, which I'll do the similar process like I did with the medium-sized flowers, and I'll cut slits in all of them going towards the center of the flower so that I can create more of a deep petal, if that makes sense, so that I can manipulate them even more to turn them into tighter little buds for my bouquet at the end. So this process is a little bit tedious and there's a lot to get through, so I'll skip through a lot of it for you, but I wanted to show you a little bit of the process for each flower. And this yellow piece here is for the bigger flowers, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to shape it as well so that I can add it to the center of my large flowers, but still give it some 3D dimension. And of course, if I'm creating 3D flowers, I'm not going to leave my leaves flat, right? So I'm going against the etched veins of these leaves. They already have some score lines in them to give them interest for 2D cards. But since we're making a 3D project, I'm going to take my stylus using the smaller ball form, and I'm going to run that stylus against that score line. And that's really going to accentuate the veins on these leaves and make them curl in a really natural way. Yes, they are paper creases, but that also gives them shape and a more realistic look to them as well. So once I get through all of the foliage, again, I don't do anything with that darkest green blue color, I'm going to start adhering all of my stamens to the flower centers. I'll do that with all of my large flowers, adding a little dot of glue to the center and using my place and pierce tool to hold those pieces in place until they dry before letting go and moving on to the next flower. Okay, so I'm working on my medium bud now. I rolled it into a bud and then I added little dots of glue all the way around where the petals overlap, and I held it in place until it dried, and then added some glue to the inside of the opening and just slid that stamen in there. This second medium-sized bud is a little bit more open, so I just added the stamen right inside the center like I did for the large blooms. Now for these smaller, tiny little buds, there's not going to be anything on the inside because these buds are all going to be very tightly closed. So I am folding all of these little blooms into tiny buds, and again doing the same thing with my glue, going all the way around, adding little dots of glue and holding it there in place as it dries and keeps its shape. All right, so all of the prep work is finally done. We're in the home stretch. I'm going back to my weaved pattern here, and I'm going to cut away that washi adhesive. Everything is dried and held down in place, so nothing should be falling apart. I can cut apart that washi frame and start building this floral arrangement against this rattan weave. It almost looks like a trellis. I'm laying down some foliage first and then my larger flowers just to get a rough idea of where things are going to land and if there's plenty of space for the rest of the elements. And when I'm happy with where the flowers are, I'm going to start by adhering down all of my large blooms first. Then I'll work on the foliage at the bottom. And once everything is glued together down there, I can start building little nests of blooms. So you'll see here I'll start adding little buds in clusters of 3 and then just start filling in all of the open space while making this cluster go at a diagonal and curve as well. Last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and fill in with the rest of that dark greenery, and there is our 3D flower arrangement against this weave. Isn't that pretty? Okay, now we're ready to frame it. I have this Doodlebug Shadowbox, and it comes in white, brown, or black at Simon Says Stamp. So I was so excited that they finally had these white ones available and grabbed me one so that I can use it on a future project, and I finally decided to make it for this particular video. I took the backing off and removed the corrugated paper and added my project on the inside, and it was so easy to put together. And that completes this framed paper weaving 3D floral project for you, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was a labor of love, but I love how it turned out, and this is going to make a wonderful gift for somebody, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by and sticking it with me through the end here. I appreciate you watching. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.